I didn't get any coffee yet. But I figure it's been warm enough lately. Get a few electrolytes. If that's what that's good for, I don't know. Alright, I just finished a video on YouTube over on my tablet, same YouTube channel. And my idea here is for electrical deals that I ran into today that I thought were pretty interesting. I got a phone call that there was a problem with a lawnmower. And friends of ours, it's almost everything is. And they said they were having trouble with their lawnmower, got through mowing the lawn and went to start it. Wouldn't start. Deader than a doornail. Nothing there. So, don't mind me. I'm writing down a number before I forget it. Alright. Well, some people like to just hand you free cash. So when I go to drive there, on the way I get a phone call. I've got a machine that all of a sudden is having trouble. And it's lost some electrical functions. It's a fly-by-wire bulldozer. Oops. True story. So, what did I find out with the two? Well, I was talking to the fella on the way there about the bulldozer and told him I'd already got the first phone call here. The next one I put on speakerphone in the car, talking with him on the way to the next job. And as it turns out, what happened was exactly what I thought in the first place. I said, go check your batteries and your alternator and your fuses. I said, check your batteries for one thing, to be sure they're good, and no 12-volt accessories unless they're through a converter. I said, converter? I said, yeah. A lot of people like take their 12-volt or radios or stereos or whatever and hook them to a battery as a 12-volt system. One battery will give it 12 volts, but when it charges, this one's discharging, so power goes out continuously, and the battery does not get charged properly because 12 volts is going out separately from the 24-volt system that's charging it. And don't ask me why, but for some reason, the opposite battery gets hypercharged. And normally they hook it up to the ground side. So if anything in the radio screws up, it's the same ground. A different hot. Because the two batteries, they're in series. So they almost always hook to the ground battery. And when they do, that one goes dead. I've seen it, I've measured it, and I don't know why. Then I've gone to this battery and measured 7 or 8 volts. It's worthless. They can't start the machine. You turn the key on, pops right up. As long as you're not drawing a lot of amps, it seems fine. Won't crank. Why? Two batteries together doubles the volts in series, not the amps. So if you have 1,500 cranking amps per battery, you don't have 3,000 amps. You have 1,500. And if you're crazy enough that you got 1,000 amp here and a 1,500 amp there, you probably have maybe 1,200, 1,250. But you count on it being 1,000. Why? Because that's all a battery's capable of. And you wipe it out otherwise, if it needs a lot more. So you need your batteries matched, balanced. And what happens is, this one on the ground side that they hook to goes to 8 volts and things start crapping out. The positive end lead battery, 16. What? No, it goes to 16. Why? You're discharging this battery, taking all the juice that would go into bringing it up. The system doesn't have a sensor to tell you how to charge each battery individually, does it? No. It charges between positive and ground. That's it. What did I just tell you you have? 24 volts. 24. Ground to hot, 24. That is with your master switch on. Hot to battery negative, 16. Battery negative or other positive because it's on a tie strap. So it's the same. Go from that tie strap, the other battery positive, to negative, 8. Add them together, 24. You cooked your battery. All your electronics just went on the fritz. Why? Because the amp flow is gone. Your 8-volt battery has no amps left for it to flow. Just one. It doesn't work like a wire. It works like a chemically induced electrical component. Screw up the chemicals, got no juice flow. It's 8 volts. Ain't no amps left. Remember I said before, if you have two 1500 amp batteries in series, you have 12 and 12 volts, 24 volts. Volts double, not the amps. Woohoo! Bye-bye. There's 1500 in the front battery, but there's no juice here to drive it. The potential difference on the ground side, woohoo, gone. Well, what's going to register? Not much. So that's the first one. I ran into talking to them that I hadn't even tested the battery yet. I told them, test the battery, test your grounds, your fuses, make sure you're getting 12 volts, or your 24 volt total, minimum when it's off. I said, then check your alternator, check your fan, your belt to the alternator. I said, because that's common on the older ones that wipe the belts out every so many months. You had some cases, if you had a machine that was put over 1,000 hours a year on it every month, you'd end up either adjusting the alternator or putting a belt on and double adjusting it. What do I mean by that? Well, first you might adjust it and tell yourself you need a belt. Then you put the new belt on later, or it blows off and you have to put it on. Then you adjust it for the new belt, drive it for an hour or two, and then adjust it again, if not within the first 30 minutes, because it's under a heavy load. And they had too small a belt to drive what they were driving. The D155AX-5 had continuous problems with keeping alternator belts properly tensioned. It wasn't enough belt to do what it was doing. So they called back later on while I was on the way and said, oh yeah, the belt was loose, it was all flopping in the breeze, the alternator wasn't producing. I said, yeah, we had a bad time there. He says, but there might be more. He says, we got it all tightened up, fired up, and it doesn't do anything different. I said, yeah, because you probably lost the memory and calibration in your controllers from the voltage surges. Number 2, I was on the way to that one. Ran the lawnmower, shut it off, won't restart. I get there, dead, 9.5 volts. Wiggle it a little, all of a sudden it's 10. Just let it do its thing and it comes up to 10. It has just enough to go click. One little relay closes. What about after that? Well, I tested with a battery tester. It didn't have enough amps, it shut off. With one of the little electronic ones that draws hardly anything. Blink, battery done. So okay, that's direct to post. That wasn't through the wires, so no connections were a problem, except my gator clips. No problem. Measured the same voltage as a voltmeter. Almost identical. Scary. So what did I do? Got my little jumper box, hooked it up. Dang, it won't crank. Sit back on the seat for the 10,000 safety switches. Up and running. How'd you do that? Disconnected a bunch of stuff and then fired it up. Again. Couldn't get out of the seat, so I locked the brake and greased up and checked. I had 18 volts coming out of that thing. Drop it all the way down to idle, 10. Throttle it all the way up, 18 volts. Cooked the battery. Yes, indeed. 18 volts across the battery, 18 volts to ground. Cooked. He says, you know what? You need to take this home. So there was another problem that was the opposite, where it was overcharging, cooked the battery, and they get through mowing the lawn. Oh yeah, there's plenty of power running everything. And the battery's worthless now. Cook the plates. It can't accept a charge. Now the funny thing is, I may put a battery in this thing, and it might charge at 14 volts or something. 14 and a half. It might. Why? Because the battery had gone so bad that it increases the voltage to put the amps in there. Well, if it won't accept the amps, there's some regulators on these old systems that will just keep pounding it out trying to get it in there. So I won't even fully know about the alternator and the regulator until I get a battery in there. But usually, wrong voltage, bad voltage regulator. So that's 2 in a row that were a dead battery. That people were certain it was a key switch, a seat switch, a mower switch, a clutch switch. Could have been anything else. But none of those matter. If your battery's dead, why is your battery dead? It's 3 years old for one, and a little bitty U1L200 thing. So it was a junk battery. They got it from some local battery outfit. And everybody's, oh, there's cheap batteries there. Yeah, I'll take an inexpensive battery. I don't like cheap batteries. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Well, then you live with the consequences. And sometimes you can afford to. That's what you do. But in this case, the battery was 3 years old. Even if it was a cheap piece of crap, it doesn't matter because it's old enough. And it's been cooked enough. So my next deal would be truck it down here and test it and go through the service and get her done. But that's one of the things where you can come up to, without thinking you're troubleshooting through, what do you have at your source? Didn't crank. He couldn't even hear a click. Exactly, because it couldn't click. Your source juice ain't there. Well, what happens if I have source juice? Now we start tracing through our switch system. Then things change. We say, well, what do you do then? My first thing then is bypassing all the safety, sitting on there, locking it in neutral, making sure that it can't go anywhere. And even if it thinks it can go someplace, you're on it to stop it. And there's nothing in front of you or behind. Well, now you reach with a jumper and a remote button. Put it right on the relay, or in this case, I can put it on the battery to the starter. And that will test the starter. Nothing else. It'll test the starter and the ground. Why? Because that little button can hold 60 to 80, 100 amps. Most of them, the ones that I try to buy from Matco, Snap-on, Mac, they'll handle 125 amps. Short term, easy. So hook the thing up direct. Okay, starter works. Problem solved there. Or technical question answered. And now you start playing with the wires, voltage drop, and whether the relay is working or not. Or relay solenoid. Number 2, your switches. Well, the other one is not all machines, but a lot of the switches anymore are on the ground side. So another test. Check to see that voltage is getting there. The voltage is getting there regardless, and you know you have a direct connect. But there are a few that have a safety switch on the incoming side and some on the outgoing side. So just remember that when you're playing with this stuff. Put yourself in the seat, hook up for the test light, and turn the key. You got power going in? Groovy. Now pull the ground side. You got power coming out? Great. Now it's lighted. That doesn't tell you everything, but that gives you an idea that you have voltage that can go all the way through. Now ground the ground side. Right to the frame. You're there, you've got it neutral, brakes, lock, crank it. If it cranks, and you know your problem on which side it is, and usually you can follow the color of the wire to wherever your switches are, or ground, or whatever it happens to be, and take care of your starter problem. In my case, all that's irrelevant. And have enough battery to crank it in the first place. So what's my next deal? You can't even test it with a voltage that low. So I put a jumper. What is that? Why can't I? Oh, NOCO. I have 3 NOCO jumper boxes. Maybe 4. I know I have 3 for sure. There's one in the shop, one in my car, and one in one of Debbie's cars. If not 2. Both of her cars. So I have at least 2 NOCO jumpers. I think the one I used was a 70 that I keep in the car. It's jumped my car a few times and the CD player went bad. I'd shut the car off, walk in the house, and it did click bang, click bang, click bang, and killed my battery. By the time I came out, everything reset. So I hook up, jump the battery, get it started and running. It does a couple of clicks and then stops. Okay, everything's fine. Shut it off, click bang, click bang. But after I left the car, sit right there for a minute in the car, no problem. Leave it, click bang. Then it got to the point where I was doing it more often. I'd hook the thing up, it'd spark, and I hear click bang. Oh no. So those are the type of things that NOCO is great for. Hook it up to your battery, turn it on, and let it sit 30 seconds to a minute. Just let it sit. Do nothing else. Why? 2 things. One of them is it does have slight diagnostics in it. If your battery is bad enough, it ain't going to do nothing. I think the last one I had that had a bad battery, it gave me a little flashy light and said, no. A different flashy light tells me there's a warning, there's a problem here. This battery today I hooked up to it and this light came on, but it stayed on. Okay, I don't remember seeing the light before. Sat down in the seat, cranked it, whirled right up and fired great. That's when I found my 18 volts. Oops. Another way that you find your 18 volts is a problem and you suspect the regulator. The voltmeter is hooked up and running, run it down to an idle. If the regulator is doing what it should, it'll come down to a certain point and stop. Well, it's already at 18. It means the regulator ain't working. And as it came down, the voltage came right down with the RPM. Day's over. A lot of your rectifiers have at least 4 and sometimes more diodes in them. 4 to 6, but 4 is a common one. And if one of them goes bad, it'll do some funky things. I didn't even bother to put it on AC. So why put it on AC? AC volts. Why? That'll tell you if a diode's actually gone causing that problem. But either way, it's not regulating. That's a problem. So, just some thoughts for you today on the electrical side. What I ran into recently that are alternator related, voltage regulator related, battery voltage related, bad battery voltage related, and possibly good batteries in the Dozer. And both of them come from alternator trouble. And in the case of the bulldozer being a -6 Komatsu and the D155s, fly-by-wire, the controllers lost their calibration. And it's possible they blew a fuse too. Because they said one of the controls is just plain dead. I'm hoping it didn't get a voltage spike. Why? One of the weird things that happens when a fan belt loosens up, or an alternator drive belt, I should say, loosens up, is sometimes you can get a whip in it. And under light load with that whip, it'll spin it so fast, almost staccato-like, that it will surge and overvolt before the voltage regulator can get a handle on it. And it'll happen quite a bit like a Dozer when your RPM is going up and down. Your voltage can do the same, especially if there's an internal problem in the regulator, bad diode, or just plain a loose belt. It can whip and fire that rascal. I don't know how or why, I just know I've read it before. Tighten up the fan belt and all of a sudden you get this nice even keel voltage that varies by maybe half a volt, sometimes a volt. You go from 14.5 volt down to idle at 14. And sometimes a little lower. So it's another thing to keep an eye on. So that's it on electrical that I found today. Hopefully it'll help some of you out there when you're checking. And always remember, if you see a problem, this is something I learned as an EMT and knew before anyway, but don't just plain trust your meter when you see something way out of sight. So I got a voltmeter on it that's like a test light. You plug it, You set it on there, ding, a light lights up, and then there's a voltmeter reading in the little panel. It's a beautiful rig. It works great. I love it. But because it was out of range, I went and got my battery tester and hooked that up and got the exact same numbers. So always when you got a case like that you're telling somebody their battery is bad, get your voltage, confirm your voltage, test the battery, and come up with junk battery. Now your next question is, why is the battery junk? And again, another funny thing that can happen with some of these simple regulated units like the lawn tractor is that if you lose a connection to the battery, amps can't flow, but sometimes the regulator will spike to try and get the amps over that into the battery. Why? Because there's no amp flow. The amps for some reason back up, and the regulator says, well, we got work to do here, and it will increase the volts sometimes. Does that mean a bad regulator? Maybe. There's been times I've seen that phenomenon go up to 15, 15 and a half, 16 volts. Clean up the battery terminals and fire it up. Steady 14 and a half. Blow your mind. It's rare, but it's not uncommon. All right, there you are. I did a quick chat on dry sleeves, taking them out and driving them in, putting them in. And I've also done, well, no, that's it for today, plus the talk that I had here. So while that one's loading, it's at, 17 minutes. It's remaining 61% uploaded. So then I'll hit this one, and you folks can have a nice electrical chat later with yourself. Or you know where to hunt me down on Instagram and Facebook. Look for Seth Deb or Pops Wrench. Actually, no, it's Pops Howard is the site to find me on. There's another one called Pops Howie. I don't have any access to that anymore, so that's why the Pops Howard came up. So contact me on Seth Dub or Pops Howard, and we'll catch up with you later. Peace out.